911. What's the location of your emergency?
I need an ambulance. I just came into my friend's house and I found him dead.
Do you think that he's beyond help?
He's been like this, it looks like, for a minute.
What makes you think that he's been there for a while?
He's hard. He was shot. Somebody shot him.
Does it look like somebody shot him?
Yeah. He's not breathing. He's not moving. He's gone.
Lansing police respond to the call of a male victim found shot inside his apartment.
When responding to a call where it's a possible gunshot injury, we really don't know what we're dealing with or what we're walking into. And we don't know if the shooter is present at the scene. We have to stay vigilant of the unknowns. So I activated my body camera. So as we entered the apartment building, we had noticed there was no signs of forced entry. The front door was slightly ajar.
Lansing Police, if you're in here, make yourself known. Ready? Watch your step.
Myself and another sergeant went to the back bedroom.
All right, yep. Oh, you're left. Sorry.
The apartment was ransacked.
Okay. They tossed it. They were looking for something. Coming across.
Clear.
He's under here.
Yeah.
We're gonna lift this.
We observed a subject that appeared to be shot in the head and had other apparent gunshot wounds to the back torso area. He was a black male, appeared to be about 25 to 35. He was laying face down in a pool of blood. The subject was cold to the touch, and there was no signs of life at this time. It was clear it was a homicide.
If you want to grab 2 medics, they don't need the whole engine crew in here and everything else. Come up here and go from there, okay? Chris is on his way. He'll be here in just a second. The rest of us will back out and hold this door and not let anybody else in and out.
We didn't want the whole battalion coming in, damaging or destroying our crime scene.
As far as I'm concerned, this whole hallway should be locked down.
Yeah. At this point, whatever happened to this young man was a complete mystery.
Investigators begin examining the scene for clues.
Any cartridge cases or anything? Yeah, it's right here. There's one.
So we discovered several shell casings and live rounds on the floor of the apartment that were from 2 different firearms. So now we're looking at possibly more than one assailant. So we had our crime scene investigators bag all our evidence. We don't find any handguns or firearms there.
One in the head, huh? Looks like.
We have to figure out who our victim is at this point. Dispatch alerted us that our subject that called in to 911 was still on scene at this time. He could be a friend, he could be a suspect.
You want to just come back to my car? I'll have to pat you down real quick for weapons and whatnot, okay? Then we're going to go to the passenger side. This vehicle right here. You don't have anything on you, it's going to poke me, stick me. Weapons. Awesome. Okay, back seat here. Take a seat right there. Thank you. So who is he? Is he your buddy or? Okay.
The caller identified the victim as 28-year-old Donovan Barfield.
Donovan was a good kid, loving. He was a little shy, you know, but once he get to know you, he opened up. He was a giving person, really. He cared a lot about people. He just was a good guy, you know, friend, son, and a father. I was so proud of him to have him as a son, the way he took responsibility and loved his kids. He said, Pops, I just want to just do the right thing by him. You know, I learned. You know, you taught me. That night, I was tossing and turning, finally got to sleep, and the phone had rung a couple times. My sister called me. She said, what are you doing? I said, what's going on? I said, well, you calling this late at night? Why you ain't sleep? She said, they found Donovan dead. I said, what? Any doubt in my mind that I would thought that someone would take his life? Why? That night, I said a prayer for him, and I said a prayer for the person who done this. Why?
Officers continue to press the 911 caller, who identifies himself as Joe, a friend and former roommate of Donovan's.
How long have you guys been friends?
I've known him for about 4 or 5 years.
Joe was crying. He was sad and appeared upset, nervous a little bit.
Why'd you come over here today?
Came to grab some shoes.
What'd you notice when you opened the door? Was it unlocked?
When I came in the door was like, it was unlocked. I stuck my key in, like the door just kind of like pushed open. So when I went in, like I seen the crib, like it looked like somebody went through the whole crib. So I'm calling for him, like, Luke. That's what I call him, Luke. Calling his name. I don't hear anything.
Did you touch anything? So you said you had a key for the apartment? Why do you have a key?
My girl had been in school, so I kind of been staying over there. Couple of months. Yeah, I just went outside and staying here. I had just dropped her off at work. Over here.
Joe spent the night at his girlfriend's place the night before. So we have to confirm that he actually was there. Could be an alibi, we just don't know.
2 to 3 weeks you've been staying with him? When did you last see him?
Last night, 7, 8 o'clock.
Okay. Do you know anybody does he have any issues? Anybody?
Nobody. I don't know really who would do something like this.
Michigan State and Lansing police detectives arrive on scene and launch the investigation into the murder of Donovan Barfield.
When we have a shooting that ends up being the result of a homicide, there is an urgency to solve this crime. Bullets don't have a name on them. We have to do everything that we can and leave no stone unturned to make sure that we get this person. We had learned that the actual 911 caller was on scene. There's always that question of how is this person involved? Are they involved only as a 911 caller, or are they a potential suspect? We knew we had to bring Joe in for more of a formal interview.
All right, so what's gonna happen? I'm gonna take you down to our police department, and the detectives are gonna talk to you there, get your whole story, try to figure this out, okay?
Detectives continue examining the scene for clues when they make a surprising discovery.
In examining the ballistic evidence in this case, that was found on scene. There was evidence of a .380 caliber weapon and a 9mm caliber weapon as well. There were spent shell casings from a .380, and there was also, I believe, some live rounds from a .380 as well. There were no signs of forced entry, leaving room for the possibility that Donovan knew who shot him. Somebody was let into that apartment willingly. With evidence of 2 different caliber weapons, immediately I'm thinking we knew we had to solve the mystery of who the shooters were.
Ultimately, our job is to keep the community safe. And we're not keeping the community safe when there's still 2 shooters out on the loose.
Investigators canvassed the neighborhood to try and build a timeline of the shooting.
When we have a situation like this, one of the utmost important things to do is a neighborhood canvass. And we have an apartment complex, so that is a big feat to go to each apartment.
Hey, sorry to wake you up if I did. We had an incident that occurred in the apartments right across the walkway. I was wondering if you may have heard anything last night.
I heard some shooting, but I don't know what it was. I didn't know if it was, I wasn't about to look out the window.
Yeah, what time was that?
Maybe 2 o'clock, I don't know.
So early morning-ish.
Yeah, I believe that, but that's...
Do you know how many gunshots did you hear approximately?
Sounded about like 7 or 8.
7 or 8?
Yeah.
You hear anybody yelling or anything like that, or just heard the gunshots? That was it?
No, I just heard doors slamming and shooting. I laid down. I'm sorry.
I do not blame you at all. Not at all.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't know, but I was like, what in the world? I said, is it shooting out here? I said, I'm going to lay down on the floor just in case.
Yep, I don't blame you.
We made contact with a neighbor that said she heard possible gunshots around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. This helps us to kind of get a time frame of when this crime happened.
Detectives then talked to the building manager to see if there had been issues with any of the residents.
I don't know if the maintenance guys have told you guys, though. We've been having 2 black gentlemen that come through here at night. There's these 2 kids. They wear hoodies. They're out late at night. And they got into the vehicles out here, and broken vehicles.
When was that?
Let's see, Tuesday night, but there was 3 or 4 vehicles.
On Tuesday night? Have you had seen them since then?
Yes, they were asking for money.
We did learn that they had a lot of crimes taking place around the apartment complex. We were wondering at this time if the car break-ins could be related to our homicide here.
When we spoke to the apartment manager of the complex, we had learned that they do not have video surveillance in the apartment complex at all. From that point, we knew that we needed to figure out what was Donovan doing prior to this happening.
Investigators are then approached by 2 residents who reveal some surprising information about an incident earlier that week.
So what happened on Wednesday that was different, or?
2 guys come down, knocked on our window.
What window?
Right there
where the sign is? Yeah. When you say they came down, where do you know they came from?
Down that way.
Do you know what apartment?
No.
Okay.
No. And the young kid said, I'll pay you $10, let me spend the night. I said, I'm gonna call the police, you better get out of here.
Can you describe the kids?
One was short.
Yeah, one was about this tall, and the other one was a little bit taller. And the one that was shorter was hiding behind the other, so where it looked like it was just one person there.
Did you see anything on them, or did you?
Well,
he
carries
wears a backpack.
And he carries a gun.
The taller guy has a backpack?
Yep.
How do you know he has a gun?
Because when he walked away, and you know how they have that other little pocket on the back part, you know, has the big zipper on it, and then they have a little, you could see a shape of one on the back on that.
When his shirt rolled up.
No.
Okay.
The female resident advised us as one of the subjects was walking away, she observed an outline of a gun in his backpack. Was it related or wasn't it? We really didn't have a description of our accused. All we knew, they were black men. One was taller and one was shorter. So not a whole lot to go on.
Did you ever see him anywhere else?
Yeah, the night that one day that our car got broke into, the
Yeah.
vibe.
I told the manager they used to come in. I left my car unlocked. They'd ramsack it 3-4 times.
Did you see them do it?
Yeah. I come to office one day and they were in my car. I went out there. I said, "Get out of my car." I told the manager, I said, "You're renting a drug dealer." She don't care.
So when you say there's drug dealers down there, how do you know that?
Because I know the people.
Well, who do you know down there?
Well, you guys got the tape. That's where they lived.
Okay, but that's not these two boys you're talking
Yes.
They hung down there too. They hung wherever they could.
The male resident explained to us that he told the management that we had some drug dealing going on the property, and he kind of pointed to where our victim had lived. So now we're trying to figure out what was Donovan's background. Was he a drug dealer? Was he associated with drugs? We just did not know at this time.
We still don't know how Donovan is getting money. We do know that they were looking for something in his apartment. So was that indeed drugs? At this point, the question of who shot Donovan Barfield was a complete mystery.
Back at the station, detectives turn their attention to the 911 caller, Joe.
Howdy. You guys catch it up?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
We ain't going to a whole lot, so cool.
Can we interrupt?
You go right ahead.
In interviewing Joe, we really wanted to hear from him why someone would do something like this to Donovan.
You found him, and how long after that did you call?
As soon as I found him.
Now tell me about the buzzer box outside. Right?
That's how I know somebody he knows. Because the only way you can get in the door is if somebody buzz you in the door.
Then you go up and just push the key in?
As soon as I stick the key in, the door just opened. I kind of like walked by the couch, and he was like under the mattress.
Did you go in the bedroom or anything?
No,
First, we're here to figure out what the hell happened to Lou and hopefully get some justice for him. But I feel like maybe you could tell us something about his lifestyle that maybe led up to this.
We had also learned from Joe that Donovan wasn't originally from Lansing.
He's from Detroit. You know, he be in a lot of stuff down there, so I don't know if it could be something from there. But as far as like him having problems with somebody or something like that, I ain't never known him to get into it with one person up there.
Okay.
Like he keeps to himself. He's a real private person.
Is it possible that Lou was shot with something that was already in the house? Is that a possibility?
Nope, because there was no guns over there. I never seen him with a gun here. Like he never carried a gun. Period. Like he never had no problems with nobody here.
Joe had assured us that in all the time that he knew Donovan, that he wasn't into drugs and didn't have any guns. But we also had the element that Donovan had just moved here. Is this something that happened when he lived in Detroit that would have led to somebody shooting him?
As the investigation unfolds, a family grieves.
Donovan's mother had him cremated, took him home. I told her, I said, I think you should bury him. She said, I'm going to keep him with me. I said, keep him in your heart. So she decided to have him cremated, take him home with her, and that's where he lays today, with his mother and sisters and brothers, with his kids.
Detectives next speak to Donovan's mother to learn more about their victim's past.
So in speaking with Donovan's mother, emotions were running high, and she was obviously grieving for her son. You referred to your son as Lou?
That his friends do. I just call him every now and then. I call him Donovan.
Okay, is there anything in his past that in either Lansing or Detroit that could have led to this?
Well, they told me that he was supposed to be trying to gamble at a friend's house, and she didn't want him to gamble there, so I don't know, maybe he came into this apartment and gamble. I don't know, something like that.
What type?
Dice.
When Donovan's mother revealed that one of his favorite activities was to shoot dice or play street craps, that caught my attention.
When playing dice, we know that sometimes drugs, guns, those things are involved in that, and that's because there's money involved. And when there's a lot of cash involved, people want to protect that cash. We started to develop the theory that Donovan's gambling could have led to somebody shooting him because of the nature of the game. We definitely had more digging to do.
After their interview with Donovan's mother, detectives get a surprise visit from one of Donovan's friends, Anthony Brown.
When interviewing Anthony, he didn't seem hesitant at all to talk to us.
Have you ever played dice with Lou before?
Yeah.
All right. He's usually high roller. Yeah.
That's what what I would do. I would shoot dice, try to get some money to help out with that.
Okay. What's the most you've ever seen Lou with? Big old stack?
I'm not sure. He probably had about $200 on it.
Okay. The information from Anthony Brown, it led us to consider that if Donovan is known to keep a lot of cash on his person or in his residence, that could have made him a target for a robbery and ultimately his death. If you had to guess, would you say it's Lansing people or Detroit people that did this?
I'd probably say Lansing, just because he was cool here. He shot dice a lot, so I'm not getting probably shot dice with the wrong person and probably set him up anything.
Did he flash money?
He flashed money like let's say if he got drunk. So I don't know if he flashed money around other people and all. So.
We'd like to ask your permission to have your phone forensically examined. We're not worried about anything on this side right now. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you. Anthony had mentioned seeing Donovan that night at a friend's house, and there was a discussion about organizing a dice game, but that it ultimately never happened. So I'd be a cop if I didn't ask you. Did you have anything to do with Lou's death? No. Okay. Your fingerprints and DNA will not be in his apartment at all because you've never been inside that apartment? No. So at this point in the investigation, Anthony Brown, he's not a suspect. He's cordial and he's speaking with us. He gives us an alibi, tells us where he claimed to be that night. I informed Anthony that I'd be following up on that, and he went on his way at that time.
But as the investigation stalls, a few days later, detectives receive a shocking phone call.
We got a phone call from one of Donovan's family members, and it was revealed at that time that the family member had received a call from a friend of Donovan's, which turned out to be Joe, the roommate, the 911 caller. The family member learned that Joe had set his desktop computer up in the corner of Donovan's bedroom with some software, which caused the computer to start recording upon motion activation in the bedroom. And during that video call, Joe proceeded to show what looked like surveillance video of the homicide suspects inside the bedroom in Donovan's apartment where he was killed. This was the first time we really had any lead of a suspect to follow up on. And we also realized at that point, Joe did not tell us what really happened the morning that he called 911 when he found Donovan. To learn several days after the fact that video evidence had been removed from your homicide scene is very concerning. So we need to get that surveillance video from Joe as fast as we can.
Detectives track down Joe, who voluntarily agrees to come in for a second interview.
I'm not happy at this point with being lied to. So my first goal in speaking with Joe was to figure out if the video is still in existence, that it hadn't been deleted. This is the moment of truth. We're either giving his family the answers they deserve, we're giving Lou the justice he deserves, or we're giving the middle finger to all of them.
And you hold the key. You hold the key.
I don't even know how this works. Like, it always happens. That person always ends up dead.
Give me that video. Give me the truth. Give me the names of the people that are threatening you. Give me the name of the that killed me. And I promise you I'll do my job. Okay, here it is. If I don't get that video, you're gonna be arrested for obstruction. Felony. Okay? It's way too late for that. It's way too late for that. We're here. You did not delete that, did you? It exists, right? The video still exists, right? Did you delete it? You did not delete it, okay. Thank God. Joe was very conflicted. He did not want to be seen as being cooperative with police. Ultimately, he did reveal what really happened when he found Donovan, is that he took the computer that captured the video, stashed it at a friend's house, and viewed some of the video, then returned to the scene and then called police. After we knew that the video was still in existence, now I questioned him about where it is. And this was a difficult conversation to get Joe to lead us to where that video was. There's nothing you can do to change it. Your name's on this. It's what you do now that makes you a man or makes you a punk.
That's when things started coming to light.
At this point, that's all we need. Is we need that piece. We need that piece of the puzzle right today.
You're almost there. Your heart's in the right place. That's your good. It's not one more step.
You want to make somebody so they can
Make the call, have him come here. Finally, Joe, he revealed to us where he had a friend keeping that computer for him. We allowed Joe to contact that friend by phone, and this kind of facilitated us sending a patrol officer to that area who made contact with that friend of Joe's and turned over that computer. Just make sure you're here. Put that over there. With Joe still in the interview room, I finally actually get my hands on this computer, and we were able to see that, yes, there are video clips possibly of homicide suspects.
When watching the video, we couldn't believe our eyes.
Now, who's that? So you think there's a third person in the room with him?
It's gotta be. If they in here, if they in the room, where is he at?
One of the subjects was kind of rifling through the room and grabbing items, taking items, moving things around. One of the items that was taken was a leather backpack on the bed in the bedroom. So at one point, this subject turns and faces the camera. We were hopeful that taking a screenshot at this time would lead to an identification of this subject. A second subject with a hood up comes into the view of the camera, and there's what appears to be in his hand a silver-colored semi-automatic handgun. So this subject is also carrying a pair of black and rose gold sneakers. So we're talking about two guys, not three?
Somebody had to be at least in there with him.
And then in another clip, there was another, possibly a third subject wearing a different set of clothing. At that point, we could be looking at 3 homicide suspects. Unfortunately, in watching this video, we never really see a clear shot of the faces for 2 of the subjects like we did the first subject. Based on the timestamp of the video and the fact that these subjects are in possession of a firearm, we were confident that Donovan was killed around this time. Long, hard road, but we got here.
Regardless of what y'all think, like, my plan was to put it on the flash drive. You know, eventually give it to y'all.
Like anonymously or something?
But I swear to you, I've never seen a day in my life. Like, I swear, never seen him. That's why I said it was a
You know
setup.
what?
So although Joe made the initial portion of this investigation very difficult, he had an alibi for the time that Donovan Barfield was killed, and we confirmed that there were no other indications moving forward that he had anything to do with Donovan's death.
After viewing the video, it became pretty clear to all of us that this puzzle was far beyond completed. Now, not only do we have 2 suspects out there carrying guns, shooting someone, we now have 3 people. We knew that we had to act immediately.
Armed with the surveillance video, but no ID on any of the 3 suspects, detectives get an anonymous tip that could crack the case wide open.
We get a Crime Stoppers tip who gives us the name of a Facebook profile and further advises us that they believe the owner of this profile is involved in the murder of Donovan Barfield. We discovered that this profile was linked to a young man named Neil Prince, and we find that Neil Prince is posting photos and trying to sell various items that were taken from this homicide scene, including the Nike Foamposites that were black and rose gold. At this point, this person is considered a homicide suspect, again, because he very closely resembles the person that's on video in this apartment the night that Donovan Barfield was killed. There are still 2 subjects that we have not identified, and with Neil Prince still walking around with evidence of a homicide, we need to get him as fast as possible.
Detectives execute a search warrant at suspect Neil Prince's home and find the stolen items in his possession: the backpack and the sneakers. Neil Prince is taken into custody and brought in for questioning.
Hey, Mr. Prince. How are you, sir? You want to sit up for it? I'm going to fix this chair so you can sit on it. We want to speak to you about a homicide that occurred over on Bayview on December 14th, specifically. Okay? Understand that just didn't take your name out of that. We have information available to us that we think that you have some knowledge about that incident that you can share with us. Okay? Okay, I will tell you there was surveillance footage in the apartment. You are on the surveillance footage. You realize that? I'm not so that I'm giving you an opportunity to tell us what happened. No. This is your opportunity. I don't know how else to make that clear. This is your opportunity to tell us what went on. You know you weren't the only one there.
I'm telling you that there's a dead man's property in your apartment. I'm telling you that I know that someone had put you in that area, and you're telling me that you weren't there. I know you were there, but what I need to know, Neil, is what happened. You're the only one who can help me with that. I need to know what happened.
I don't know what you're talking about. What property you're talking about.
That's the part that I don't think you're understanding. We're not BSing you on the video. There's video of you grabbing shoes. Those shoes were found where tonight in your apartment. If you didn't do the shooting, why don't you tell us who did? We know you were there.
Neil denied that he had any involvement with the death of Donovan Barfield. However, he's seen on video on the date of Donovan's death in Donovan's apartment, and he is in possession of items that were stolen from the apartment of a homicide victim. So we were able to obtain charges for his arrest.
We'll give you a ride, Neil. You're going to be heading downtown, okay? We come back.
Detectives still have not identified their other 2 suspects. It's then they learn of the arrest of a person familiar to the investigation: Anthony Brown.
He shot dice a lot, so I'm not getting probably shot dice with the wrong person. They probably set him up, anything.
Anthony, who we had spoken to previously, had been pulled over by the police, and they found a 9mm handgun in his possession. We knew that he was with Donovan that evening, and we knew that we had shell casings that were 9mm on the scene. It was discovered that, indeed, that 9mm that was in Anthony's possession during that traffic stop was the same 9mm that matched those shell casings that were on scene of Donovan's homicide.
At that point, we needed to speak to Anthony Brown.
Remember me, please? Do you know what can happen to somebody that provides false information on a homicide investigation? I'm not anything. If I were to write a search warrant for your cell phone, what do you think would show your location? Well, during this homicide, where would it show you the location of your cell phone? We're not talking about that. So, when I ask you these questions, Anthony, it's because I already know. Now, I'm not saying that you're a cold-blooded killer. What I'm saying is, you were there, went sideways, and I can prove it.
He still would not disclose anything about the homicide. He offered an alibi. So at that point is when we had to go check the alibi out. And unfortunately for him, his alibi witness did not share the same story with us.
It's you, but I'm a lawyer or something. Now that you've requested an attorney, I'm not going to ask you more questions, but knowing what we know now, you're going to think talk about what you were saying.
Now we have 2 suspects in custody for the homicide of Donovan Barfield, but we still had a 3rd suspect out on the loose, and we did not know who had pulled the trigger.
Then, nearly 3 months after Donovan's murder, a young man named Willie Fletcher comes into the station with his lawyer and a shocking story to tell.
This juvenile was willing to share intimate knowledge about the homicide for some type of deal for him. During that interview, we learned indeed that he was the 3rd person. He gave us a play-by-play of the night of Donovan Barfield's death. He tells us that Anthony is the mastermind of this whole situation. Anthony told the juvenile as well as Neil that, hey, I know a guy, he carries a lot of money. I was playing dice with him earlier. We're gonna rob Donovan Barfield of his money. And the juvenile said, Anthony told us that I already set up the dice game, he's waiting for us. The juvenile says he had a gun. Anthony had a gun. Anthony gives the juvenile an instruction to shoot him, and the juvenile shoots Donovan from behind. The juvenile tells us that he was so scared that he almost dropped the gun. Anthony then went up to Donovan and shot him 2 more times in the head. And the juvenile said, I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't want to be part of this. Anthony threatened me. Anthony said if I ever said anything that he was going to kill my parents. So I knew that in order to survive, I needed to continue with what we were doing. And that's when we stole all those items and drove back to the house. And we didn't really, nobody really else said anything about it.
The juvenile's confession was instrumental to us being able to solve the case. We ultimately uncovered what appeared to be a cold-blooded scheme of robbery and murder.
At the end of the day, we can't bring Donovan Barfield back, but we did get justice. But that doesn't excuse or doesn't change the fact that it was a tragic loss. And another young man lost his life to something so senseless by 3 other young men that will never see any other place in their life besides these brick walls.
Neil Prince and Anthony Brown are both found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Willie Fletcher is sentenced to 60 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 28 years.
Donovan was a quiet kid. I miss Smile. Yeah, I miss his smile. I miss watching him just grow into being a man. You know, I miss him loving his mother, sisters, brothers so much. You know, he loved them so much. And, you know, I know that he hurts because he's not there with them. But he's there in the spirit with them. That's my only son in this world. First son and last son. You know, so I miss him a lot.
This was a very heinous crime.
You're in here, Mayo.
The brutality of these attacks was something that I have never seen.
Got another body down here.
Now we're dealing with 4 family members.
I didn't know if the person that had done this was after anyone else in our family.
We really needed the truth.
The night was unusually cold for early spring in Manhattan, a biting wind slicing through the streets, rattling fire escapes and tossing loose newspapers down the sidewalks. In a dimly lit alley behind a row of brick apartment buildings on the Lower East Side, a figure lay motionless, half hidden in shadow. The stench of decay hung in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. It was 3:17 a.m., March 14, 1987, when patrol officers discovered the body of 24-year-old Lillian Moore, a rising journalist at a local newspaper, whose curiosity had always carried her a little too far into dangerous corners of the city. She was discovered wearing a red coat, her eyes wide open as if frozen in a final scream, her hands clutching a crumpled notebook, pages smeared with both ink and blood. Her identity was instantly recognized, but the circumstances surrounding her death were a nightmare no one could untangle. New York, 1987. The city was vibrant, loud, and violent, teetering on the edge of chaos. Streetlights flickered, taxis honked, sirens wailed, yet amidst this urban symphony of disorder, the death of a single woman sent ripples through neighborhoods, offices, and homes alike. Lillian was more than a victim, she was a symbol of curiosity turned deadly, a story that demanded answers, and the city, as if holding its breath, demanded justice. The alley where her body was found was narrow, flanked by towering brick walls smeared with graffiti, broken glass glinting like tiny daggers under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. It was the kind of place where secrets thrived, shadows lingered, and witnesses vanished before they could speak. That night, the alley became both a crime scene and a puzzle that would haunt the NYPD for decades. Detectives arrived swiftly, their coats flapping in the cold wind, flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the scene with harsh, clinical precision. Sergeant Tom Reynolds, a seasoned officer with 20 years on the force, knelt beside the body, inspecting the notebook with careful fingers gloved against the chill. He noted the haphazard scribbles, an unfinished story, names half-written, and, at the very end, a line that seemed almost like a warning, "They're watching." A shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't random. Lillian had stumbled into something much larger than herself. The notebook, the alley, the timing, all whispered secrets that refused to speak clearly, as if the city itself were conspiring to hide the truth. Reynolds looked up at the flickering streetlight, wondering if the killer had watched the scene unfold, had slipped into shadow and disappeared without a trace. He would spend countless sleepless nights trying to answer that question. Witnesses were scarce. A homeless man named George claimed he had seen a dark figure leaving the alley just before dawn, but his memory was foggy, clouded by alcohol and the fatigue of life on the streets. He described a man wearing a long coat, his face obscured by the collar, moving quickly, almost as if he had rehearsed the escape 100 times. Another passerby, a cab driver, had heard a muffled scream but didn't stop, fearing trouble. By the time he returned, the alley was empty except for the body. These fragments of observation formed a map of uncertainty, each piece sharp yet incomplete, each account contradictory, each thread of evidence slipping through the fingers of detectives like smoke. The investigation began immediately, NYPD detectives combing the alley, photographing, dusting for fingerprints, collecting fibers, anything that might lead to a suspect. Yet, despite modern forensics for the time, fingerprint analysis, blood typing, shoe prints, the trail grew colder by the day. The apartment building across the alley yielded little. No one had seen or heard anything unusual, doors locked, blinds drawn, the tenants too absorbed in their own lives to notice the tragedy unfolding a mere dozen feet away. Police theorized that the killer was someone who knew the terrain intimately, someone who understood the pulse of the neighborhood, someone who could strike and vanish without leaving a fingerprint, without leaving a name. Lillian Moore was not a stranger to confrontation. Her stories at the newspaper had exposed corrupt landlords, shady politicians, and the occasional mob-connected businessman. Her editor, Margaret Whitman, described her as fearless, relentless, sometimes reckless, driven by a desire to uncover truths others were too scared to touch. Lillian's apartment was neat but sparse, her desk piled with notes and photographs, evidence of a life spent chasing stories that most would rather leave buried. The day she disappeared, she had been investigating a series of arsons and thefts in the Lower East Side, a pattern that had escaped the notice of many. Police suspected that her murder was connected, but the evidence refused to speak. No fingerprints matched, no faces were recognized, and the notebook, while cryptic, revealed nothing actionable. Days turned into weeks. The city moved on, as it always did, leaving the alley behind as a silent witness. Detectives pored over leads that went nowhere, interrogated potential suspects who denied knowledge, chased alibis that couldn't be verified. The case was labeled a cold case within months, an acknowledgement that the answers were slipping further into the shadows, that time itself was erasing the footprints of the killer. Yet for the Moore family, and for Sergeant Reynolds, it was anything but cold. Every anniversary, every news report, every casual remark about unsolved crimes reignited the pain, the frustration, the gnawing need for closure. Years passed. Forensic science advanced, but the alley remained silent, the notebook remained cryptic, and the city's memory faded. Lillian's murder became one of the many stories whispered in precincts, a ghost haunting detectives who refused to let her go. Investigators tried polygraphs, revisited witnesses, re-examined fibers, but every lead twisted into a dead end. The dark figure George claimed to have seen became a phantom in their reports, a face without a body, a person who existed only in testimony. The community that had once buzzed with shock slowly settled into uneasy routine, the horror of that March night dimming but never disappearing entirely. By the late 2000s, the case had gathered dust in the NYPD archives, a file thick with reports, photographs, and annotations. It was a relic of a time when crime-solving relied on hunches, legwork, and intuition. But something changed. A new wave of technology, a revolution in DNA analysis, promised the impossible, answers to questions long considered unanswerable. Blood from the crime scene, long stored in evidence, was now testable against vast genealogical databases, tools that could trace family connections across decades and continents. What had once been an alley of shadows was now under the scrutiny of algorithms, patterns, and digital reconstructions. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. A lab technician in a nondescript New York facility ran the DNA through the database, not expecting miracles, not expecting revelations, but merely following procedure. The first match was partial, a distant cousin, a thread to something larger, something human. Detectives who had long given up on the case suddenly found themselves staring at a screen, at names and connections that breathed life into the cold evidence. The possibility of closure was intoxicating, the kind that made seasoned detectives forget the hours, the months, the years they had spent wrestling with uncertainty. Every folder, every photograph, every scribbled note in the notebook suddenly carried renewed significance. The Moore family, by then decades older, had lived with a quiet, relentless pain. Anniversaries were marked not with celebrations but with memorials, candlelight, and whispered prayers. Friends had moved away, some had passed, and the city that had been a backdrop to Lillian's life had changed almost beyond recognition. Skyscrapers now towered where tenements once stood, subways carried throngs where empty streets had once echoed with the footsteps of an unseen killer. Yet the memory remained, stubborn and vivid, of a woman whose life had ended too soon, whose curiosity had cost her everything. The detective assigned to review the cold case in 2015, Officer Emily Hayes, approached it with a mixture of skepticism and cautious hope. She had seen too many false leads, too many families shattered by unresolved crimes. Yet something about this one, perhaps the preserved evidence, perhaps the meticulous notes in Lillian's notebook, made her feel that the city itself wanted the story told, that justice, delayed but not denied, could still be served. She traced the genealogical links, cross-referenced public records, and slowly, painstakingly, a portrait of a suspect emerged, sketched not with pencil or ink, but with DNA, family trees, and digital breadcrumbs that led straight into the heart of the city. By the time the suspect's name appeared on her screen, the weight of the decades was almost unbearable. This person had lived an ordinary life on the surface, raised a family, worked in offices and stores, smiled and moved through the city that had once trembled at their secret. Yet beneath that mundane exterior lay the truth of Lillian's murder, a crime that had haunted Manhattan for nearly 30 years. The revelation was shocking, unexpected, and utterly human in its banality. A killer, finally unmasked, through nothing more than the threads of kinship, the silent testimony of DNA, and the relentless persistence of detectives unwilling to let a story die in obscurity. And yet, even with a name, even with a face, the story was far from over. Questions remained, lingering like smoke. Why Lillian? Why that alley? Why had the killer vanished so completely into the city's shadow? The answers, while tantalizingly close, refused to offer the comfort of certainty. The city, which had changed so much since 1987, now bore the quiet imprint of history, the residue of a crime that refused to fade, the echo of a woman who had sought truth and paid for it with her life. The revelation hit like a lightning strike, sudden and blinding. Emily Hayes stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, unwilling to breathe, unwilling to break the fragile silence that hung in the lab. The name belonged to someone entirely ordinary on the surface, a person who had lived in Queens for decades, whose neighbors recalled nothing more scandalous than a polite wave or the occasional late-night hum of a television. Yet behind the veneer of normalcy lay decades of secrets, shadows that had danced in plain sight, unnoticed, undisturbed, until DNA had become the flashlight in the dark. Every officer on the cold case squad understood the gravity. Every file, every photograph, every note suddenly had a heartbeat. It was as if the city itself exhaled, a collective release of tension held for nearly 30 years. Emily didn't hesitate. She contacted Sergeant Reynolds, now retired but still tied to the Moore case by stubborn loyalty and haunted memories. He arrived at the precinct with a cautious optimism, his coat buttoned against the spring chill, the weight of years etched into his face. Together, they reviewed the evidence, the genealogical tree, the partial DNA matches, and a chilling narrative began to emerge. The suspect's background, once anonymous and unremarkable, now loomed with possibility. Each familial connection, each residence, each employment record provided threads, weaving a tapestry of a life that had moved through the city like a ghost. The ordinary became sinister, the mundane became menacing. The task now was both simple and impossible, to confirm that the person in front of them on paper, in a family tree, and in digital records was indeed the killer who had stalked the Lower East Side all those years ago. It required a careful, methodical approach. Surveillance teams were deployed, photographs discreetly taken, interviews conducted without revealing suspicion. The suspect, oblivious to the decades-old crime they had committed, lived with the assumption that time had buried their secret. But time, it seemed, was not an ally, it was an accomplice waiting to expose them. For the Moore family, the news was almost too overwhelming to process. Lillian's younger brother, Mark, now in his early 40s, had carried the trauma like a shadow across the years. Every birthday, every holiday, every fleeting glance at a newspaper headline about violence, disappearance, or murder resurrected the unanswered questions. He remembered the night vividly, the sirens, the alley, the notebook stained with blood, and he remembered the hopelessness that followed, the police shaking their heads, the cold case files that gathered dust in the precinct. When Emily Hayes called to inform him of the potential breakthrough, he barely recognized his own voice as he whispered, "Is it really true? After all these years?" The investigation began in earnest. Officers traced the suspect's movements in 1987, reconstructing their routine, their social circles, and the faintest hints of interaction with Lillian Moore. It was a painstaking reconstruction, a digital archaeology of a life that had once moved in the shadows of New York streets. Surveillance footage, long archived photographs, and even personal memorabilia provided fragments that, when pieced together, formed a mosaic of behavior, opportunity, and chilling intent. Each revelation was met with disbelief. How could someone so ordinary commit something so monstrous without leaving the faintest clue? Interviews with neighbors from that era yielded little. Memories had faded, faces blurred by time, but the detectives persisted. One elderly woman recalled a man walking briskly along the alley near the time of the murder, his coat collar pulled high, his hat shadowing his eyes. She couldn't remember his face, but she remembered the unnerving certainty with which he moved, the sense of purpose, the almost theatrical precision. Another recalled hearing a scream late at night, a sound that had briefly pierced the city's hum but had been dismissed as ordinary city noise. Slowly, painstakingly, the fragments began to align with the DNA evidence, and the possibility of closure grew ever more tangible. Forensic experts worked around the clock, comparing archived samples with modern databases, cross-referencing genealogical links, and meticulously cataloging each match. Blood typing, hair analysis, and fiber comparison, all techniques that had once failed to yield results, now provided supporting evidence, strengthening the case. The alley where Lillian's body had been found became a symbolic epicenter, its shadows finally illuminated by science and determination. Detective Hayes, in particular, felt a connection not just to the case, but to the woman whose life had been taken too soon. It was a responsibility that transcended time, a promise that the city itself had whispered to her, "Don't let this be forgotten." The suspect's routine became a focus. Officers discovered that in 1987, they had frequented the neighborhood, their employment conveniently located near the Lower East Side, their schedule providing windows of opportunity. Small, almost trivial details, a grocery store receipt, a parking stub, a witness recalling a man checking the locks on a building, suddenly gained immense significance. These fragments, overlooked for decades, now assembled like pieces of a deadly puzzle. The detectives realized the suspect had moved with the precision of someone who understood the city's rhythms, the alleys, the side streets, the blind spots. They had planned, executed, and vanished, leaving behind only Lillian Moore's red coat and her final, haunting notebook entry, "They're watching." The breakthrough did not come without emotional cost. Emily Hayes found herself navigating the ethical and psychological implications of unearthing a decades-old crime. How does one confront a human being who has lived 30 years in ignorance of detection, yet who is responsible for a life cut tragically short? The officers were trained, but human reactions, the shock, the moral gravity, the whispers of vengeance, could not be contained. Hayes herself often walked the crime scenes alone, feeling the presence of Lillian in the alley, listening to the imagined echoes of that final scream. Every day spent on the case became a confrontation with mortality, with justice delayed, and with the city's hidden darkness. As the genealogical investigation deepened, officers discovered startling connections, family members who had long moved away, cousins unaware of the crime, siblings who had unwittingly sheltered the killer's secret. Each discovery was like a jolt of electricity, a reminder that time cannot hide wrongdoing forever. The detectives traced the suspect's lineage, uncovering a network of relatives whose own histories were intertwined with Lillian's life in ways that were nearly invisible until illuminated by modern technology. It was a digital resurrection of a crime long thought unsolvable, a mapping of human connections that revealed not only the perpetrator but the echo of consequences rippling through generations. The public, once unaware or dismissive, became captivated by the unfolding story. Media outlets covered the investigation with fervor, emphasizing the combination of cutting-edge DNA technology and relentless detective work. Headlines screamed of breakthroughs, of long-lost justice, of a killer finally unmasked through genealogy. Community members, old neighbors, and readers of Lillian's former newspaper followed the story with fascination and unease. The city remembered, even if it had tried to forget, and the alley, once silent and foreboding, now resonated with the attention of those determined to see the truth revealed. For Lillian's family, each day of investigation brought a mix of dread and hope. Memories of that March night in 1987 returned with painful clarity: the sirens, the lights, the alley's oppressive shadows, the smell of blood and decay. They had lived with unanswered questions for decades, questions that now, finally, seemed within reach of answers. The emotional weight was crushing, yet also oddly liberating. The possibility of justice, however delayed, was a balm against the relentless ache of uncertainty. The detectives meticulously rebuilt the timeline of the murder. March 14, 1987, became more than a date. It was a narrative, a sequence of moments reconstructed from witness statements, forensic evidence, and the newly discovered genealogical data. The suspect had known the area, had observed Lillian's movements, and had seized a fleeting opportunity to strike. Each step, each movement, was now laid bare, a choreography of violence that had remained invisible for 30 years. The precision, the planning, the cold execution, all became apparent, painting a chilling portrait of a mind capable of hiding in plain sight. Emily Hayes, often alone in the lab late at night, stared at the evidence, feeling the weight of history pressing down. She imagined Lillian in the alley, notebook in hand, driven by curiosity, and felt a pang of kinship with the woman she had never met. Every fiber of evidence, every DNA match, every genealogical link was a testament to human persistence, a refusal to allow evil to remain unchallenged. The case was no longer simply about solving a crime, it was about honoring a life, understanding the darkness of the human psyche, and confronting the ways in which the past refuses to stay buried. And so, as 2016 approached, the detectives prepared to confront the suspect, armed with decades of evidence, technological breakthroughs, and the inexorable truth that time does not protect those who commit unspeakable acts. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when decades-old secrets would be laid bare, when the shadows of the Lower East Side would finally yield the truth of what had happened in the alley, and when Lillian Moore, long silenced, would be heard again through the unwavering pursuit of justice. The day they decided to make contact was overcast, the sky a heavy gray that seemed to press down on the streets of Queens like a warning. Surveillance teams had tracked the suspect for weeks, meticulously cataloging routines, visits to local stores, and fleeting interactions with neighbors, each moment painstakingly compared against the reconstructed timeline of March 1987. Emily Hayes and her team knew that one misstep could allow the decades-old killer to vanish into the city's chaos once more, but every precaution taken only heightened the tension. The suspect, utterly unaware, went about their daily life with the casual indifference of someone who believed time had buried their secrets. Officers watched from parked cars and across street corners, cameras trained on the suspect's modest home, a two-story structure with peeling paint and a small, neatly trimmed garden. The suspect exited, briefcase in hand, dressed in unassuming clothing, a face unmarked by the weight of guilt, a life lived in quiet normality. Hayes noted the minutiae, the rhythm of their steps, the habitual glance at a mailbox, the way the suspect paused at the corner to nod at a passing neighbor. Each detail, trivial to a stranger, was a lifeline for the detectives, proof that the suspect existed in the same reality that had once hosted Lillian Moore's final moments. The arrest plan was meticulous. They could not risk a confrontation that might alert the suspect or, worse, destroy evidence. The team coordinated with precision, assigning roles with military-like discipline, one group for the approach, one for securing the residence, one for documenting every movement. Hayes herself would lead the entry, feeling the strange combination of fear, adrenaline, and moral responsibility that comes when confronting a person responsible for decades of suffering. The city itself seemed to tense with anticipation, every distant siren and honking horn an omen, every shadow a reminder that the past was about to collide with the present. When the suspect returned home that afternoon, the scene unfolded like a slow-motion replay of years of careful planning by the detectives. They approached calmly, uniforms visible but measured, voices firm but controlled. The suspect froze, surprise flickering across their face as the detectives identified themselves and presented the warrants. The ordinary facade cracked for the first time, revealing a flicker of panic, the faintest twitch of fear. Hayes spoke steadily, outlining the decades-old murder, the DNA match, and the evidence painstakingly collected through genealogical reconstruction. The suspect's denial was immediate, instinctual, a reflex born of shock and disbelief. Yet the weight of science, the undeniable proof embedded in each strand of DNA, the meticulous reconstruction of movements, left no room for escape. Inside the home, officers cataloged evidence, carefully photographing, collecting, and documenting. A meticulous examination of personal belongings revealed no overt confession, no trophy, no hint of pride in the decades-old crime, only ordinary items, traces of a life lived in careful normality. Yet, in the ordinary, the detectives found the extraordinary truth, a person who had committed an unspeakable act and blended seamlessly into the fabric of the city. The disconnect between the crime's brutality and the suspect's mundane existence sent shivers through the team. How could someone capable of such calculated violence go unnoticed for so long, live decades without exposure, and yet be the same person who once struck in the shadows? Interviews with family members revealed nothing overt, but patterns emerged. The suspect's relatives spoke of a quiet individual, often withdrawn, with a fascination for puzzles and strategy, someone who seemed to anticipate outcomes in a way that was almost unsettling. Hints of obsession, careful observation, and meticulous planning echoed the calculated approach evident in the murder itself. For the detectives, each anecdote, each recollection, became a thread in a web that stretched back to 1987, connecting the suspect's personality to the crime with an almost clinical precision. Meanwhile, the Moore family grappled with a whirlwind of emotions. Lillian's mother, now elderly and frail, struggled to reconcile the decades of grief with the sudden reality of identification. Mark Moore, her brother, oscillated between relief and rage, memories of that night flashing with renewed intensity. The red coat, the notebook, the alleyway, and the whispering shadows of March 14th returned to life in vivid detail. Every unanswered question surged forward with relentless force. They attended the interviews, listened as evidence was explained, and felt the distant echo of Lillian's voice through the meticulous unraveling of the past. The arrest ignited media frenzy. Reporters, long aware of the Moore cold case, converged on Queens with cameras and microphones, eager for details, eager to witness closure in a story that had haunted New York for decades. The city, which had moved on from that night, paused to absorb the revelation. Headlines screamed across newspapers and television broadcasts, 1987 murder unmasked through DNA genealogy, cold case solved after 29 years, man lives in Queens for decades unaware he is arrested for murder. The ordinary became extraordinary, the quiet life became a symbol of hidden darkness, and the alley where Lillian's life had ended became a pilgrimage of remembrance and shock. For the detectives, the work was far from over. Hayes and her team revisited the alley, retraced the suspect's steps, and compared every detail against reconstructed timelines and forensic evidence. The notebook, previously a collection of cryptic thoughts and partial names, became a crucial artifact, its pages examined for subtle indications of interaction with the suspect. Patterns emerged, mentions of local establishments, references to fleeting faces, small observations that suggested Lillian had noticed someone tracking her movements, someone who had carefully planned to remain unseen. Every moment of the investigation, every detail long considered irrelevant, now pulsed with significance. The forensic team presented findings with quiet authority. Fibers from the suspect's clothing matched those at the crime scene, blood traces in the notebook provided partial DNA evidence, and other minute clues corroborated the sequence of events reconstructed through genealogical mapping. These findings, while technical, were profoundly human in implication. They confirmed the narrative, aligned science with witness testimony, and provided irrefutable proof of the suspect's presence and intent. For Emily Hayes, the evidence was more than scientific validation, it was a bridge connecting decades of pain with the possibility of justice finally realized. Community members who remembered the initial shock of Lillian's murder offered reluctant testimony. Neighbors, shopkeepers, and passers-by described fleeting impressions, long-dismissed sounds, and moments of unease that now aligned with the reconstructed timeline. Their memories, imperfect yet persistent, became part of the living mosaic of history, a testament to the city's collective memory and its ability to retain shadows until the light of truth revealed them. The detectives marveled at the interplay between human recollection and technological precision, realizing that time had simultaneously obscured and preserved the details essential to resolving the case. Throughout the investigation, the specter of Lillian Moore remained vivid. Hayes often returned to the alley alone, imagining her final steps, the notebook clutched in her hands, her gaze alert for unseen threats. She visualized the suspect in the shadows, the deliberate precision of their movements, and the stark violence that had ended a life so full of promise. In these moments, Hayes felt a deep, almost physical connection to the victim, a responsibility to articulate every detail, honor every question, and ensure that the truth, long buried, emerged with clarity and force. The suspect's demeanor in interviews oscillated between disbelief and quiet calculation. Initially defensive, offering denials and minimal responses, they gradually revealed subtle inconsistencies in their account that aligned with the forensic evidence. Officers observed closely, noting micro-expressions, shifts in tone, and the almost imperceptible tension that accompanies recognition of inevitable exposure. The ordinary life, carefully constructed over decades, showed the first cracks under the scrutiny of truth. Each statement, each hesitation, and each defensive gesture reinforced the narrative that the detectives had painstakingly built, a narrative of planning, opportunity, and calculated violence. As the case progressed toward indictment, the city's collective consciousness became entwined with the unfolding story. Media coverage, community reactions, and the Moore family's quiet anguish coalesced into a mosaic of awareness, reflection, and historical reckoning. The Lower East Side Alley, once a forgotten site of horror, now symbolized the intersection of past and present, of human curiosity and consequence, of ordinary life intersecting with extraordinary evil. The red coat and blood-stained notebook, silent witnesses to the crime, became icons of the relentless pursuit of justice. And yet, even as the suspect faced the inexorable consequences of decades-old actions, questions lingered. Why Lillian? Why that night? Why the particular path through the city's labyrinthine streets? The answers, while partially illuminated by evidence and testimony, remained shadowed by uncertainty, as if the city itself guarded the final nuances of the crime. The alley, the streets, and the surrounding community retained an echo of fear, curiosity, and unresolved tension, a reminder that even when names are known and faces identified, the human mind struggles to fully comprehend the depth of long-hidden darkness. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a distant alarm. The suspect sat across from Detective Emily Hayes, their hands folded neatly on the table, eyes betraying a flicker of unease beneath a carefully maintained veneer of calm. The walls, painted a dull gray, seemed to close in, reflecting the weight of decades of secrets. Every movement, every breath, every hesitation was magnified, each detail a potential crack in the armor of someone who had lived undisturbed for nearly 30 years. Hayes leaned forward, her voice measured but firm, recounting evidence, timelines, DNA matches, and genealogical connections. The suspect listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes blinking rapidly, but never outright confessing. It was a delicate dance. Every question had to be precise, every statement corroborated with evidence strong enough to prevent evasion. Hayes had anticipated the suspect's psychological defenses, the rationalizations, the instinct to minimize, deny, or deflect. She watched closely as micro-expressions betrayed guilt, a tightening jaw, a fleeting downward glance, a slight tremor in the hands. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension, each passing minute dragging the past into the present with relentless force. The detectives knew that one misstep could jeopardize the culmination of decades-long pursuit, but every strategy had been meticulously planned, informed by years of experience and a careful study of human behavior. Outside, the precinct was alive with controlled chaos. Officers prepared for every contingency, the corridors humming with anticipation. The Moore family waited in a nearby room, held in the delicate balance between fear and hope. Mark Moore, Lillian's brother, sat with his hands clasped tightly, eyes darting to the door at every distant footstep, every murmur of voices. Memories of that night, March 14, 1987, returned in stark clarity: the alley, the red coat, the notebook, the faint whispers of fear and urgency that had never been resolved. Now, decades later, the possibility of answers hovered tantalizingly close, bringing both relief and renewed anguish. As the interrogation deepened, Hayes pushed further. She referenced details that only the killer could know: small scratches on a railing, footprints partially obscured by snow, the precise angle of a discarded newspaper. The suspect's denial wavered, then faltered, revealing a vulnerability hidden for years. The detectives pressed gently but insistently, each question a probe into the decades-old shadows. The notebook, so long a symbol of mystery, became a key tool. Pages that had once seemed cryptic now held clues: mentions of local shops, fleeting observations of the suspect's movements, fragments of dialogue overheard in passing. Each revelation tightened the net around a life built on deception. In parallel, forensic analysis continued to yield results. Fibers collected from the alley, once overlooked, now matched items in the suspect's home. Blood traces, preserved in a sealed evidence bag for decades, were confirmed via modern DNA testing to belong to Lillian Moore. Handwriting analysis of the notebook revealed pressure points and patterns consistent with intense observation, potentially linking entries to interactions with the suspect. The science, cold and objective, illuminated truths the city had resisted for years. It was a reminder that time, while concealing evidence in plain sight, also preserves it for those patient and determined enough to uncover it. The suspect's history was scrutinized meticulously. Background checks, employment records, social interactions, all revealed a life ordinary on the surface but underlain with careful planning and subtle manipulations. Neighbors from 1987 recounted minor oddities: long forgotten, the man who watched from the corner, the habit of noting deliveries, the unusual focus on who entered and exited buildings. These small recollections, once dismissed as inconsequential, now coalesced into a disturbing portrait. The detectives began to see the contours of a calculated mind, a person capable of observing, planning, and executing with precision, yet slipping unnoticed through the fabric of urban life. Community reactions were mixed. Some residents felt vindication, a sense that the city's long-forgotten wounds were finally being addressed. Others recoiled at the notion that someone they had passed on the street for decades had harbored such darkness. Media coverage amplified the intensity, portraying the suspect as both ordinary and monstrous, an unsettling reminder that evil can reside in the familiar. Headlines blared: New York cold case solved after 29 years, genealogy unlocks murder mystery, ordinary life masks dark past. The city, ever alive with noise and motion, paused to reflect, if only briefly, on the fragile boundary between safety and hidden threat. For the Moore family, each day of questioning brought a cascade of emotions. Memories once dulled by time surged with immediacy. Lillian's laughter, her curiosity, the very cadence of her voice became tangible again. Each revelation, each corroborated fact, felt like both a comfort and a sting, confirming the truth while reopening old wounds. They traced the suspect's reconstructed path through 1987, seeing their sister's final movements in vivid, unflinching detail: the walk down the alley, the notebook in hand, the fatal encounter that would end her life. The ordinary streets of Manhattan became a stage where decades of concealment were undone, and the shadows of the past pressed upon the present. Hayes, aware of the psychological toll, balanced meticulous professionalism with empathy. She understood that uncovering the truth was not merely about evidence, it was about human lives, long affected by unresolved trauma. Her approach to the suspect combined interrogation with observation, creating an environment where truth could surface without coercion. Each subtle shift in expression, each hesitation, each contradiction was catalogued, building a profile of intent, opportunity, and moral responsibility. The detective worked tirelessly, knowing that the culmination of decades-long effort rested on these nuanced interactions. As the days unfolded, additional evidence surfaced. The suspect's interactions with former colleagues, acquaintances, and extended family were re-examined. Patterns emerged: Behaviors consistent with observation, moments of presence near the Lower East Side without explanation, unexplained absences that aligned with the timeline of Lillian's murder. Every detail, every minutiae, was scrutinized. The detectives mapped out these behaviors against the reconstructed sequence of events, creating a detailed narrative that left little room for doubt. The combination of forensic science, genealogical analysis, and human recollection formed a converging trajectory toward undeniable truth. The interrogation reached moments of tense silence, broken only by Hayes' calm but persistent questioning. The suspect's eyes flickered with something unnameable, a recognition of inevitability, a confrontation with a past long ignored. They shifted in the chair, adjusted their tie, hesitated, and then spoke in measured, clipped tones, offering fragments that hinted at knowledge yet denied full accountability. Hayes, aware of the psychological nuance, pressed carefully, connecting evidence with memory, science with narrative, until the suspect could no longer maintain the facade. The ordinary life, painstakingly maintained for decades, was unraveling under the relentless light of truth. Outside the precinct, the city watched, both figuratively and literally. Journalists filed updates, neighbors speculated, and the memory of Lillian Moore resonated anew. The alley where she had been murdered became a symbol, a touchstone for reflection on justice, time, and human persistence. The streets, once silent witnesses, now bore the weight of collective memory, of decades spent in unresolved tension. The red coat and the notebook, silent testaments to tragedy, became focal points for public imagination, connecting the past to the present with stark clarity. In the midst of it all, Hayes reflected on the delicate interplay between science and humanity. DNA evidence had revealed the suspect, genealogy had mapped connections, forensic analysis had confirmed details, and yet it was the human element, the observation, the empathy, the painstaking attention to nuance, that allowed the case to move toward resolution. Each revelation was a reminder that the pursuit of justice is not merely procedural, but deeply human, requiring patience, intellect, and a willingness to confront darkness that can reside anywhere, even behind ordinary facades. And still, the shadows lingered. Questions persisted, the motives, the final moments, the choices that led an ordinary life to intersect with extraordinary violence. Hayes knew that even as arrests were made and indictments filed, the echoes of March 14, 1987, would continue to reverberate through the city, the alley, and the lives it touched. The case, once a cold file, was now alive with meaning, a testament to the persistence of truth and the enduring impact of crime on those left behind. The following weeks blurred into a tense rhythm of interviews, forensic reviews, and the slow unraveling of decades-old shadows. Detective Emily Hayes moved through the precinct like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of facts, timelines, and evidence. Every phone call, every witness statement, every small detail from 1987 was revisited, cross-referenced, and analyzed with painstaking care. The suspect's history, long hidden behind an unremarkable exterior, was dissected, minor inconsistencies in employment records, fleeting accounts of unusual behavior from neighbors, patterns of meticulous observation that suddenly became far more sinister. It was as if a citywide tapestry was being rewoven, threads of memory and technology intersecting in a complex, chilling design. Lillian Moore's family remained both anxious and vigilant. Mark Moore sat in the waiting room for hours, replaying every fragment of memory from that night. He thought about the notebook, now preserved as evidence, its pages stained and frayed yet suddenly so powerful. The words they're watching seemed prophetic, almost haunting. Each revelation from Hayes and her team brought relief tempered with anger, a mixture of vindication and sorrow. Lillian's mother, frail but alert, listened quietly as the timeline was reconstructed in painstaking detail. The evening she left her apartment, her walk down dimly lit streets, the steps she never returned from. It was painful, yet essential. They were finally seeing the truth, decades late, yet fully formed in a narrative that no one could deny. The suspect's demeanor during the ongoing investigation oscillated between defensiveness and brittle composure. In private interviews, they tried to rationalize their behavior, offering partial recollections that shifted subtly under scrutiny. Every answer, every hesitation, was weighed carefully by Hayes and her team. They knew that psychological pressure alone could not yield justice. Corroboration through forensic evidence, DNA, and genealogical mapping was essential. And yet, the human element, the glimpses of fear, guilt, or surprise, added depth to the understanding of a mind that had remained hidden for nearly 30 years. Community members became increasingly involved. Old neighbors, shopkeepers, and friends who had lived through the 1987 summer of unrest and crime began to piece together their own memories. Small details, once dismissed as inconsequential, now carried enormous significance. The man who lingered near the alley, the sound of hurried footsteps at odd hours, a shadow that moved against the flow of streetlights. These recollections, imperfect yet persistent, merged with forensic and genealogical findings to form a tapestry that bridged time. The city, alive with both movement and memory, became a witness once more to a story that refused to fade. The detectives discovered more nuanced aspects of the suspect's life. Hobbies, personal routines, and interpersonal interactions all painted a portrait of meticulous attention to detail. Patterns emerged, behaviors that indicated observation, calculation, and careful planning. Former colleagues, once interviewed casually, were re-interviewed with precise focus, and small inconsistencies began to surface. A photograph here, a receipt there, a vague mention of an errand, each piece reinforced the larger picture. It was a demonstration of how decades can conceal truth, yet simultaneously preserve it for those patient enough to uncover it. Emily Hayes often returned to the Lower East Side alley alone, imagining Lillian's final steps, her notebook clutched tightly, and her gaze alert to the unseen threat. The city had changed, yet the shadows remained. Broken fire escapes, graffiti-streaked walls, and the echo of footsteps on cobblestones reminded Hayes that the city itself bore witness. She walked the alley slowly, reconstructing each detail, where the suspect could have waited, the approach, the confrontation. Every movement was mapped, every line of sight calculated, and every minute detail of Lillian's behavior examined. Hayes felt the pulse of history in her chest, the weight of decades pressing down as if demanding that the truth finally be acknowledged. Forensic breakthroughs continued to emerge. Fibers collected from clothing, once too minute to analyze effectively, were now matched to the suspect's possessions. Residual DNA, stored in the evidence room for nearly 3 decades, confirmed connections beyond reasonable doubt. Each new match was a jolt, a verification that science could illuminate truths hidden long ago. Hayes and her team carefully documented every finding, aware that the legal process would require unassailable proof. The intersection of human observation, forensic science, and modern technology was yielding the most complete understanding of the crime yet possible. The suspect's interviews grew increasingly tense. Hayes confronted subtle discrepancies between statements and physical evidence, pressing the suspect on minutiae that might have been forgotten or deliberately omitted. They flinched at specific questions, the positioning of the notebook, the alley's exit routes, and the precise timing of steps. Hayes noticed patterns of speech, micro-expressions, and involuntary gestures that revealed more than words could. The ordinary life, built over decades, was slowly being peeled away, layer by layer, exposing the dark core that had long remained hidden. Mark Moore began to process the reality of the decades-long pursuit. Anger, grief, and relief intermingled in a chaotic emotional storm. He recalled nights spent awake, haunted by unanswered questions. Why had the city allowed this shadow to persist? Why had no one uncovered the truth sooner? Now, each revelation from Hayes felt like both justice and a painful reminder of lost years. Lillian's red coat, preserved in the evidence vault, became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience, a tangible link to a sister whose life had been brutally interrupted. The notebook, once cryptic, now provided insight into her final investigation and the prescient awareness of being watched. Meanwhile, media attention intensified. National and local outlets covered the case with unprecedented detail, highlighting the extraordinary combination of DNA technology, genealogical research, and decades-long detective work. Headlines described the city's shock, the ingenuity of modern forensics, and the extraordinary patience of investigators. Public fascination grew, ordinary streets, unnoticed individuals, and a murder that had eluded justice suddenly became part of a narrative of revelation and reckoning. The city, which had once moved on, paused to confront the implications, that evil could reside in plain sight, that history could be rewritten through persistence, and that the passage of time did not erase responsibility. The detectives, however, focused on the subtler aspects, confirming opportunity, analyzing behavior, and ensuring that every element of evidence aligned with the suspect's reconstructed movements. The alley, long a place of unresolved fear, became a central point of analysis. Hayes and her team retraced the suspect's likely paths, examined potential witnesses who had been overlooked, and revisited archival photographs to identify overlooked details. Each minor revelation reinforced the narrative, a life carefully observed, meticulously executed, and concealed for decades, now confronted with the inevitability of exposure. As the case moved toward indictment, tension mounted. Legal teams reviewed every detail, ensuring that decades of evidence could withstand scrutiny in court. Forensic experts provided testimony, corroborating DNA findings, fiber matches, and behavioral analysis. Every witness account, every reconstructed movement, every detail from the notebook was catalogued with precision. The narrative that had once seemed fragmented was now complete, forming a coherent, chilling account of premeditated murder. Yet even as closure approached, the city's shadows lingered. Questions about motive, timing, and circumstance remained partially unanswered, and the emotional resonance of the crime continued to ripple through the Moore family and the wider community. Hayes understood that even a legal resolution could not entirely erase the impact of 30 years of uncertainty. The alley, the red coat, the notebook, they were enduring symbols of a story that demanded remembrance, reflection, and acknowledgement. The detectives revisited the psychological profile of the suspect, seeking to understand how someone could live an ordinary life for decades after committing such an act. Patterns of control, observation, and planning emerged, revealing a mind capable of careful calculation and strategic concealment. Hayes reflected on the delicate balance between understanding and judgment, to comprehend the methods and motives without excusing the crime. Each day brought further clarity, a deeper understanding of both the individual and the societal context that had allowed the crime to remain hidden for so long. And so, as indictment loomed, the city seemed to hold its breath. 30 years of unanswered questions, decades of fear, frustration, and grief, converged toward a single point, the revelation of truth, the assertion of justice, and the long-awaited acknowledgement of a life lost. Lillian Moore, once silenced, was finally speaking through the work of those who refused to forget. The red coat and blood-stained notebook, silent witnesses for so long, had become instruments of revelation, connecting past and present, tragedy and justice, shadows and light. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation, as if the very walls understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Detective Emily Hayes sat in the corner, reviewing her notes one final time, eyes scanning the timeline, the forensic evidence, and the statements she had meticulously prepared over months of investigation. The Moore family occupied the front row, tense, anxious, their hands intertwined, knuckles white from the sheer force of long-suppressed fear and hope. The suspect entered, unremarkable in appearance yet carrying the weight of decades of hidden culpability. The room seemed to shrink around them, the years of evasion collapsing into a single, unrelenting moment of truth. The prosecution laid out the timeline with deliberate precision. March 14, 1987, became a sequence of meticulously reconstructed events, Lillian Moore leaving her apartment, her walk through the dimly lit streets, the fateful encounter in the alley that had ended her life. Fiber matches, DNA evidence, witness recollections, and genealogical reconstruction were presented in a relentless cadence, leaving no space for doubt. The suspect's ordinary existence, carefully maintained over decades, was juxtaposed against the calculated violence of that night. Every ordinary detail became extraordinary under the unforgiving light of scrutiny. Emily Hayes took the stand, recounting her own journey through the case. She spoke of long hours spent in the lab, tracing genealogical links, analyzing DNA samples preserved for decades, and reviewing every shred of evidence. Her voice, steady yet imbued with restrained emotion, conveyed both the factual precision of the investigation and the profound human cost of unresolved trauma. She described the meticulous reconstruction of the suspect's movements, the painstaking review of archival footage, and the interviews with witnesses whose memories, long dormant, became crucial pieces of the puzzle. Each word reinforced the inexorability of truth, a story finally brought to light after decades in darkness. The defense, predictably, challenged every detail. They questioned memory reliability, suggested the potential for contamination in decades-old evidence, and painted the suspect as an ordinary citizen suddenly accused of a crime from a long-past era. Yet the evidence, both scientific and circumstantial, proved resilient. The DNA match, confirmed across multiple independent labs, the fibers from the suspect's home corresponding to those found at the crime scene, and the careful reconstruction of behavior and opportunity formed an unbroken chain. Even the most skeptical juror could not ignore the coherence of the narrative, the alignment of past and present into an incontrovertible portrait of guilt. Outside the courtroom, the city followed the proceedings with a mixture of fascination and unease. Media coverage broadcast the details of a case that had haunted New York for decades. 1987 cold case breakthrough, genealogy unmasks long-hidden murderer, justice for Lillian Moore after 29 years. Social media buzzed with speculation, recollections from longtime residents, and reflections on the nature of crime and concealment in a city that prides itself on its anonymity. The ordinary streets of Manhattan, once indifferent witnesses, now seemed alive with memory, each corner and alleyway resonating with history and consequence. Within the courtroom, tension mounted as the suspect took the stand in their own defense. Their testimony was measured, cautious, a careful dance to maintain composure under the weight of overwhelming evidence. Denials and justifications intermingled with subtle acknowledgments, inconsistencies creeping in under intense scrutiny. Hayes listened closely, noting micro-expressions and the flicker of hesitation. Each detail was catalogued mentally, every gesture interpreted as part of the unfolding psychological narrative. The suspect, long accustomed to blending into the city's rhythm, now confronted a reality that rendered evasion impossible. Mark Moore watched silently, his emotions a tightrope between grief, anger, and the tentative relief of long-delayed justice. Memories of that night, the red coat, the notebook, the alleyway, played vividly in his mind, reframed by the clarity of investigation and the immediacy of courtroom presentation. Every statement, every piece of evidence, brought both pain and validation. He felt Lillian's presence in the room, not as a ghost, but as a force compelling truth to emerge from shadows long unchallenged. The silence of decades was finally broken, replaced by the structured rhythm of accountability and moral reckoning. The prosecution called witnesses who had observed the suspect decades earlier. Their testimony, sometimes fragmented and tentative, was nonetheless compelling when framed alongside the corroborating forensic evidence. Minor details, the man who lingered near delivery entrances, the odd patterns of observation, subtle recollections of clothing or behavior, formed an intricate web of consistency. Each statement reinforced the narrative, illuminating the deliberate precision with which the suspect had orchestrated a life and a crime, hidden in plain sight for nearly 3 decades. The notebook itself was introduced as evidence, its pages examined under intense scrutiny. Analysts demonstrated how Lillian's writings, previously considered cryptic, revealed a remarkable awareness of her environment, documenting fleeting observations of the suspect's behavior, glimpses of attention from strangers, and fragments of overheard conversations. The entries, once enigmatic, now provided context for the suspect's stalking, the methodical preparation, and the anticipation of opportunity. The notebook became a bridge between victim and perpetrator, linking perception with evidence in a way that no testimony alone could achieve. Forensic experts recounted the discovery of fibers and residual DNA, explaining in precise detail how evidence preserved for decades was matched to modern samples. The courtroom listened, rapt, as the experts described the methods of extraction, the corroborative testing, and the reliability of the results. Each technical description carried the weight of decades of science and persistence, underscoring the improbability that such a match could be coincidental or erroneous. The combination of modern technology and careful preservation of historical evidence formed a compelling narrative of scientific inevitability. The defense attempted to cast doubt, suggesting that memories could be faulty, that small inconsistencies might undermine credibility, and that the passage of time rendered reconstruction inherently unreliable. Yet Hayes and the prosecution countered with meticulous alignment of timelines, forensic corroboration, and genealogical certainty. Every witness recollection, no matter how tentative, was cross-referenced and validated. The sequence of events from that March night emerged not as fragmented stories, but as a coherent, unbroken chain that spoke louder than any objection. The climax approached with the closing statements. The prosecution recounted the relentless pursuit of truth, the meticulous gathering of evidence, and the profound human cost of decades of uncertainty. They emphasized the courage of the Moore family, the patience and skill of investigators, and the inexorable march of science and morality toward justice. The defense pleaded for consideration of human fallibility and the extraordinary passage of time. Yet the weight of facts, the alignment of evidence, and the compelling narrative constructed from both memory and modern science could not be denied. In the final moments, as the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom felt suspended between past and present. The city outside moved with its usual indifference, yet within these walls, the weight of history pressed with almost tangible force. Hayes reflected on the journey from the alleyway in 1987 to this moment, the painstaking investigation, the DNA breakthroughs, the genealogical mapping, the interviews, the community involvement, and the decades of shadow and doubt finally converging on truth. Every decision, every step, had been necessary to ensure that justice, however delayed, would be served. For Mark Moore and the rest of Lillian's family, anticipation was mingled with exhaustion. The years of unanswered questions, nights of worry, and decades of longing for closure had led to this singular point. The red coat, the notebook, the alley, they had become symbols of resilience, memory, and the inexorability of truth. The family held one another, silent yet bound together by shared grief and hope, as the city beyond the courthouse windows carried on, unaware of the extraordinary convergence of time, technology, and human determination that had brought this moment to fruition. And still, the shadows lingered. Even as verdicts would be delivered, even as sentences would be pronounced, the psychological and emotional reverberations of that March night remained. The city, the family, and the investigators were all forever marked by the interplay of violence, concealment, and revelation. Hayes understood that closure is not an event but a process, a series of reckonings with the past, present, and future. The alley, the red coat, and the notebook had borne witness not only to tragedy but to the endurance of justice, the persistence of memory, and the eventual unmasking of hidden darkness. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, their faces solemn, eyes fixed forward. Every person in the room seemed to hold their breath, the air thick with anticipation, as if the decades of waiting had condensed into a single, electric moment. Emily Hayes sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly, every nerve alert, every thought focused on the culmination of 30 years of relentless pursuit. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, unaware that a reckoning was about to unfold, that the shadows of the Lower East Side, once unnoticed and unchallenged, were about to confront daylight. The foreperson stood, voice steady but carrying the weight of the collective decision. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged on all counts." The words struck like a hammer, reverberating through the room. Gasps, held breaths, and a moment of stunned silence gave way to an almost tangible release of tension. Mark Moore sank into his chair, tears streaming silently, relief mingling with grief. His sister's life, stolen 3 decades ago, had finally been acknowledged with truth, accountability, and the affirmation that justice, though delayed, was possible. The suspect's reaction was subtle but telling. A faint twitch of the lips, a momentary blank stare, and then a controlled exhale. Years of evasion, of blending seamlessly into the city's fabric, of living under the assumption that time had concealed their crime, now collapsed under the undeniable weight of evidence and verdict. Emily Hayes observed quietly, noting the psychological toll, the almost imperceptible fracture of a carefully maintained facade. This was the culmination not only of law and science but of persistence, morality, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. As the sentence was pronounced in the days that followed, the city seemed to pause, collectively acknowledging the magnitude of the closure. Life behind bars would be the ultimate reckoning, yet for the Moore family, it was not merely punishment, it was confirmation that their decades of pain, anxiety, and unresolved grief had mattered, that their calls for justice had finally been answered. The red coat, once a symbol of sudden tragedy, became a testament to survival and memory, and the notebook, preserved for decades, now stood as a chronicle of observation, courage, and the prescience of a young woman taken too soon. The media coverage was relentless, broadcasting every detail of the trial, the forensic revelations, and the emotional testimonies of family and investigators. New York cold case closed after 29 years, DNA and genealogy exposed decades-old murder, justice for Lillian Moore, killer identified, convicted. Social media erupted with commentary, reflections on how ordinary lives can conceal extraordinary darkness, and speculation on the intersections of science, memory, and human persistence. The public, fascinated and horrified, reeled from the revelation that someone living seemingly ordinary, unremarkable, and unnoticed could be capable of such calculated violence. For Emily Hayes, the trial was a crucible, testing not only her investigative skill but her capacity to bear witness to human suffering and moral reckoning. She revisited every detail, every alley, every fragment of evidence that had led to this moment. The painstaking genealogy work, the DNA cross-references, the witness interviews, and the reconstructed timelines were more than technical achievements, they were acts of moral commitment, affirming that even the shadows of decades could be illuminated by persistence, intelligence, and empathy. Hayes felt a connection to Lillian Moore, imagined her presence in the room, and took solace in the knowledge that the young woman's life, while tragically cut short, had finally resonated with the city, the law, and memory. The Lower East Side, where the murder had occurred decades ago, became a focal point for reflection. Old neighbors recounted memories, revisiting the alleyway where the crime had taken place, recalling fleeting glances, sounds, and suspicions long dismissed. The city itself seemed to carry the echo of that night, the weight of unresolved fear, now partially lifted. Each corner, each shadow, each flicker of movement through the streets was a reminder of the interplay between anonymity and observation, between ordinary life and hidden darkness. Residents reflected on the nature of memory, justice, and the unforeseen intersections of human behavior across decades. Mark Moore walked the streets where Lillian had walked, retracing steps frozen in memory. The notebook in his hands, carefully preserved as evidence, felt both heavy and sacred. Each entry, each observation, offered insight into his sister's perception, her awareness, and her courage. He traced her path through the alleyway, imagining her movements, noting where the suspect had likely positioned themselves, and reflecting on the chilling precision with which the crime had been executed. The act of retracing those steps was simultaneously agonizing and cathartic, an acknowledgement of loss tempered by the certainty of justice finally achieved. The suspect, now incarcerated, became a subject of psychological scrutiny. Investigators and analysts examined the patterns of behavior, the careful concealment, the calculated observation, and the ordinary life maintained alongside extraordinary crime. How had someone managed to evade detection for so long? How had decades of anonymity allowed such darkness to persist unchallenged? Experts debated, theorized, and cataloged behavioral traits, providing insight into the intersection of human morality, psychology, and the capacity for concealment. The lessons of the case, while horrifying, contributed to broader understanding of human behavior, criminal patterns, and the intricate dance between opportunity, action, and accountability. The trial's conclusion did not erase the past, but it created a bridge between trauma and acknowledgement. For the Moore family, the decades of unanswered questions, grief, and sleepless nights were validated through legal recognition and societal acknowledgement. The city, too, reflected on its role as witness, as both silent observer and participant in the slow unfolding of justice. The narrative, once fragmented and obscure, became a coherent testament to human persistence, the inevitability of truth, and the ways in which moral responsibility can transcend time. Emily Hayes returned to the crime scene one last time. The alley, still marked by weather and wear, seemed smaller somehow, less menacing, yet still resonant with history. She imagined Lillian Moore walking that path, notebook in hand, sensing but unable to fully identify the danger that had stalked her. The investigation, trial, and conviction transformed the site from a place of unresolved horror into a testament to the endurance of truth and justice. Hayes felt a profound sense of closure, tempered with the lingering knowledge that such shadows can exist anywhere, concealed beneath the surface of ordinary life. The red coat, preserved in the evidence vault, became a symbol not only of tragedy but of resilience. The notebook, its pages now carefully archived and studied, served as a bridge between victim and society, a record of observation, intelligence, and the consequences of being aware yet vulnerable. The Moore family, while forever changed, experienced a form of vindication, knowing that their sister's life, her courage, and her story had not been forgotten. The community, having witnessed decades of uncertainty, could finally reflect on the intersection of science, human determination, and moral reckoning. Even as the case concluded, the echoes persisted. The city, relentless in motion, absorbed the resolution yet could not entirely forget the trauma that had unfolded. The alleyway remained a silent witness, the shadows lingering, a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. The lessons of the Moore case reverberated through law enforcement, forensic science, and collective consciousness, emphasizing that even decades-old crimes can be illuminated through persistence, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to truth. The culmination of decades of work demonstrated the intersection of technology and humanity. DNA analysis, genealogical mapping, forensic reconstruction, and meticulous detective work converged to create a narrative so precise that no rational doubt could persist. Yet it was also human observation, empathy, and moral determination that gave the evidence meaning, connecting facts to consequence, crime to accountability, and tragedy to acknowledgement. The resolution, while legal, was profoundly human in its implications, affirming the endurance of justice despite time, distance, and human fallibility. And so, as the city resumed its ceaseless motion, as sirens wove through the streets and conversations continued in cafes, offices, and homes, the shadows of the past remained, but the darkness had been pierced. Lillian Moore's life, violently cut short, had finally resonated with clarity, justice, and acknowledgement. The red coat, the notebook, and the alley had borne witness, silently yet insistently, and the city, at last, had listened. Even after the verdict, the city seemed to hum with an uneasy awareness. Life went on, but certain streets, corners, and alleys retained the memory of what had transpired decades ago. The Lower East Side, once just another block in the ceaseless rhythm of Manhattan, had become a repository of collective recollection, its shadows bearing silent witness to the intersection of ordinary life and extraordinary violence. Emily Hayes walked those streets often, retracing not the suspect's steps this time, but Lillian Moore's. The notebook, forever preserved as evidence, provided a map of observation, awareness, and caution. Lillian had seen, had felt, and yet the shadows had moved faster, longer, and with lethal precision. Hayes felt the weight of those decades in each step, the gravity of unresolved fear finally transformed into testimony, proof, and remembrance. The Moore family grappled with a complicated mix of closure and lingering grief. Mark Moore wandered through old photographs, letters, and the notebooks that had documented Lillian's life, trying to reconstruct the moments that had been abruptly stolen from them. The sense of vindication brought warmth, but shadows of absence persisted. Nights were still haunted by the echo of unanswered questions, what Lillian might have accomplished, the life experiences she had been denied, the friendships, milestones, and laughter that would never come. Her mother, frail yet resilient, spoke quietly of relief, but also of the unfillable emptiness, the realization that justice, even when served, could never restore what had been lost. Community members reflected in their own ways. Neighbors who had once noticed small oddities, brief glimpses of presence, or fleeting behavior that now seemed sinister, began to talk openly for the first time. Stories emerged, fragmented yet vivid, about a man who had walked among them unnoticed, whose life mirrored normalcy while harboring the capacity for unspeakable acts. The city's collective memory began to reconstruct itself, layering observation with hindsight, uncertainty with revelation. Conversations in cafes, on street corners, and in community centers focused on trust, vigilance, and the delicate balance between awareness and fear. The ordinary environment had concealed darkness, and the realization rippled through the consciousness of those who had long walked familiar streets without knowing. Emily Hayes observed these reactions with a sense of solemn responsibility. She knew that even as the legal system had spoken, the emotional and psychological aftermath of the crime would resonate for years. The alley where Lillian had been murdered was no longer just a crime scene, it had become a symbol, a reminder of vulnerability and resilience. Hayes often returned there alone, imagining the young woman's final moments, reconstructing her observations, the fleeting sense of danger she had sensed, and the calculated steps of her attacker. Every detail mattered: the position of a discarded paper, the angle of a flickering streetlight, the echo of footsteps on uneven pavement. These remnants of a past life demanded acknowledgement, a confrontation with memory that was both painful and essential. Forensic analysis continued to provide insight into the methods employed during the crime. The fibers and DNA evidence, re-examined in light of the trial, revealed subtle nuances about the suspect's approach: careful movement, avoidance of traceable contact, and precise execution. The extraordinary care with which the crime had been committed, and the ordinary life maintained afterward, offered chilling lessons about human behavior, predatory observation, and the potential for darkness to exist within a familiar context. Hayes catalogued each finding, understanding that the intersection of science, psychology, and human morality was central to interpreting events long obscured by time. Psychologists consulted on the case discussed the long-term effects on communities exposed to unresolved trauma. Residents who had lived near the crime scene, who had once noticed fleeting anomalies, and who had absorbed the fear and uncertainty of a missing person case, experienced a range of responses: heightened vigilance, renewed anxiety, and, in some cases, a lingering sense of connection to the victim. The case demonstrated that the impact of violent crime extends far beyond immediate victims and perpetrators. It ripples through families, neighborhoods, and entire social networks, leaving a legacy of memory, reflection, and sometimes unresolved unease. The Moore family engaged with these dynamics consciously. Mark Moore became involved in local initiatives to educate communities about safety, awareness, and the importance of observing anomalies without succumbing to paranoia. He spoke publicly about Lillian, emphasizing both the tragedy and the lessons learned from her meticulous awareness, captured in the notebook that had ultimately provided a glimpse into her final moments. The family's advocacy became a bridge between personal loss and societal education, channeling grief into a form of resilience that acknowledged pain while fostering vigilance. Meanwhile, Emily Hayes continued to study the broader implications of the case. She reviewed archival evidence, reconstructed behavioral patterns, and traced genealogical data that had been instrumental in identifying the suspect. The intersection of technology and human observation fascinated her. DNA sequencing and genealogical mapping had intersected with decades of careful detective work, witness accounts, and archival reconstruction to produce a narrative that was both scientifically precise and deeply human. Hayes reflected on how persistence, empathy, and analytical rigor could illuminate truths long concealed, and how human memory, imperfect yet persistent, had contributed to the unmasking of hidden darkness. The suspect, now incarcerated, confronted the isolation and consequences of long-hidden actions. Observers noted subtle behavioral patterns that had persisted since the trial: moments of reflection, fleeting signs of self-awareness, and occasional attempts at rationalization or reinterpretation of past events. Psychologists analyzing the case suggested that the convergence of decades of concealment, exposure, and accountability created complex psychological tension, revealing how ordinary lives can harbor extraordinary secrets, and how accountability eventually disrupts carefully constructed facades. Communities across the city engaged in reflection. Conversations arose about the nature of trust, observation, and the balance between awareness and paranoia. Citizens considered how ordinary patterns of life, walking down familiar streets, interacting with neighbors, engaging in daily routines, might intersect with hidden danger. The Moore case became a lens through which collective memory, urban psychology, and moral reckoning could be examined, emphasizing that even ordinary environments are shaped by the interplay of vigilance, observation, and human unpredictability. For Hayes, the final months of investigation and post-trial reflection were both exhausting and illuminating. She maintained meticulous notes, revisited crime scene reconstructions, and engaged in conversations with forensic specialists, psychologists, and genealogists. Each perspective added depth to understanding the case, reinforcing the intricate web of cause, effect, and consequence that had spanned 3 decades. Hayes recognized that the resolution of legal questions was only part of the narrative. The human, emotional, and social dimensions persisted, demanding attention and contemplation. The alleyway, the red coat, the notebook, they remained silent yet potent symbols of both tragedy and resolution. Hayes often returned at dusk, when shadows stretched long across worn pavement, imagining Lillian's perspective, sensing both vulnerability and acute awareness. She noted details that others might overlook: a faint scratch on a fire escape, the angle of a streetlight casting long shadows, the position of discarded paper or debris. These traces, remnants of human presence and action, served as reminders of the intricate interplay between observation, action, and consequence. The city, in its motion and indifference, retained the echoes of past trauma, yet now carried a layer of understanding, acknowledgement, and partial resolution. The Moore family continued to engage with memory as a form of action. They held small gatherings to commemorate Lillian's life, discussed safety and vigilance with local organizations, and worked to ensure that her awareness, courage, and legacy were preserved in tangible ways. The notebook, once a cryptic record of fleeting observations, became an educational tool, demonstrating the power of attention, perception, and documenting one's environment. Through these acts, the family transformed personal tragedy into societal awareness, channeling grief into vigilance, memory, and proactive engagement. Emily Hayes reflected on the enduring lessons of the case, that persistence, human observation, scientific innovation, and moral commitment converge to illuminate truths hidden by time, that ordinary lives can conceal extraordinary darkness, and that closure, while never fully erasing trauma, provides a framework for understanding, remembrance, and moral reckoning. She understood that even as the city moved forward, the shadows cast by crime, concealment, and observation would continue to resonate, subtly shaping perception, memory, and behavior across generations. Even in the months that followed, the community remained subtly changed. Streets that had once been taken for granted now carried an awareness of vulnerability, observation, and consequence. Conversations among neighbors, discussions in classrooms, and informal reflections in cafes and offices reflected the psychological and moral impact of the case. The Moore family, Emily Hayes, and the broader community shared a tacit understanding that awareness, vigilance, and moral action are ongoing processes, shaped not only by extraordinary events but by the subtle interplay of memory, perception, and human persistence. Months after the verdict, Emily Hayes returned once more to the alley where Lillian Moore's life had been abruptly taken, now marked subtly by the passage of time yet indelibly imprinted with memory. The brick walls, the cracked pavement, the faint traces of grime and weathering, all seemed to resonate with the echoes of that night in March 1987. Hayes walked slowly, her boots clicking softly against uneven stones, imagining Lillian's measured steps, the slight rustle of her red coat, the grip of her notebook, and the acute awareness she carried that, tragically, had been insufficient against the calculated darkness waiting in the shadows. Hayes felt the weight of decades pressing against her consciousness, the sum of painstaking investigation, forensic breakthroughs, genealogical revelations, and human persistence culminating in the quiet gravity of acknowledgement. In the months following the trial, the city began to settle into an uneasy rhythm. Residents who had once passed the alley without thought now regarded it with both vigilance and reflection. Conversations in nearby shops and cafes frequently returned to fragments of memory, the man who had loitered in the evenings, the sounds of hurried footsteps at odd hours, or the lingering perception that something was slightly off, long forgotten until illuminated by the recent revelations. The community, while relieved at justice, wrestled with the disquieting realization that normalcy can conceal profound danger, and that decades of oversight can both mask and preserve it. Parents spoke to children differently, neighbors observed more attentively, and small, subtle changes in daily behavior became a testament to lessons learned from tragedy. Mark Moore, having navigated the culmination of the trial and verdict, now faced the quiet aftermath of grief and resolution. He revisited the notebook repeatedly, tracing Lillian's observations, reconstructing her perceptions, and reflecting on the subtle courage embedded in her words. Each entry seemed infused with prescience, fleeting glimpses of a figure that would later be identified, observations of street patterns, small notations about sounds or movements that might have seemed inconsequential at the time. Now, however, these observations formed an almost chilling testament to awareness and intelligence, to the capacity of an individual to see danger even when others did not, and to the cruel precision with which her life had been disrupted. Emily Hayes, meanwhile, began to document her own reflections in private reports, focusing not only on the mechanics of investigation but also on the interplay of human behavior, science, and moral reckoning. The genealogical breakthroughs that had led to the identification of the suspect were carefully analyzed, integrated with forensic timelines, witness recollections, and behavioral profiling. Hayes understood that the case represented more than a legal resolution. It embodied the convergence of decades of human diligence, scientific innovation, and moral commitment. The work was exhausting yet profoundly rewarding, a testament to the persistence of truth even when it lies dormant beneath layers of time and obfuscation. The suspect's incarceration became a study in psychological decomposition. Experts examined patterns of coping, reflection, and rationalization. How does a person reconcile decades of normalcy with a past crime of profound violence? Behavioral analysts noted the subtle fractures that had appeared during interviews and trial testimony, micro-expressions of guilt, fleeting recognition of inevitability, and the slow erosion of carefully constructed rationalizations. These observations reinforced the central lesson of the Moore case, that no amount of time can entirely shield the morally responsible from eventual reckoning, and that hidden darkness, while patient and strategic, is ultimately vulnerable to persistence, awareness, and truth. In the wider community, reflection and remembrance became intertwined. Citizens who had long walked familiar streets unconsciously attuned to subtle irregularities now discussed the importance of observation, situational awareness, and responsiveness to anomalies. Neighborhood meetings incorporated lessons drawn from the case, emphasizing vigilance without paranoia, awareness without obsession. The narrative of Lillian Moore, her intelligence, courage, and tragic fate, became both cautionary tale and educational tool, illustrating the interplay of human observation, personal responsibility, and societal involvement in the pursuit of justice. The notebook, preserved in careful custody, underwent additional forensic scrutiny. Analysts reviewed handwriting, pressure patterns, ink variations, and alignment with observed sequences of events. Each page became a window into both victim and perpetrator, Lillian's observations of subtle behavior, her awareness of potential threat, and her meticulous record-keeping provided a rare perspective on the anticipation of danger. While the presence of certain entries and notations now illuminated the suspect's calculated proximity, premeditation, and methodical approach. The notebook was not merely evidence, it was a chronicle of interaction, perception, and the collision of ordinary life with concealed malice. Emily Hayes consulted with colleagues to analyze broader patterns revealed by the case. She traced parallels with other unsolved incidents, considering whether similar behavioral strategies might have gone undetected elsewhere. The investigation reinforced fundamental principles, persistence, cross-referencing historical evidence, and the integration of emerging scientific methods can reveal truths hidden for decades. Hayes reflected on the role of human observation in complementing technological advancement. Without witness memory, family vigilance, and attention to small anomalies, the genealogical breakthrough alone might not have sufficed to unmask the hidden perpetrator. For the Moore family, the notebook and the red coat became symbols of resilience and remembrance. Small commemorations, quiet gatherings, and reflective walks along familiar streets transformed grief into active acknowledgement. Each page of the notebook, every detail of the red coat, carried lessons about vigilance, perception, courage, and the enduring consequences of human choices. The alley, once a site of horror, was now both a memorial and a touchstone, reminding them of tragedy endured, justice achieved, and the enduring weight of memory. The psychological aftermath for the community remained profound. Local residents reported subtle changes in their daily behaviors, heightened attention to strangers, awareness of fleeting interactions, and an acute sensitivity to environmental cues. Psychologists studying urban behavior noted the Moore case as a unique example of how unresolved trauma can shape collective perception, influencing the ways people navigate spaces, interpret anomalies, and balance awareness with ordinary routine. The case became a template for understanding the enduring, often invisible, impact of violent crime on social consciousness. Emily Hayes also noted the intersection of moral reflection and procedural innovation. Each step of the investigation, from initial archival reviews to forensic testing, genealogical analysis, and psychological profiling, represented a deliberate calibration of method and ethics. The alignment of patience, attention to detail, and commitment to moral accountability exemplified the potential of law enforcement to achieve closure even in cases thought permanently cold. Hayes documented these processes meticulously, ensuring that the lessons learned could inform future investigations, guiding colleagues and successors in the pursuit of truth across time, technology, and human complexity. As months turned into years, the narrative of the Moore case became integrated into broader discussions of criminal justice reform, forensic innovation, and community engagement. Public talks, academic papers, and police seminars referenced the convergence of science, human observation, and persistent investigative methodology. The case was no longer only a local tragedy, it had become a lens through which the interplay of time, memory, and morality could be studied, debated, and understood. Hayes, while personally exhausted, recognized the significance. The case had transcended a single crime to become a symbol of the power of persistence and the inevitability of accountability. Mark Moore continued to engage with the public dimension of remembrance. He spoke at educational forums, shared insights on community vigilance, and emphasized the importance of listening to intuition, preserving evidence, and recognizing subtle patterns of behavior that may indicate danger. The narrative of his sister's life, her intelligence, and her foresight, once overshadowed by tragedy, became a foundation for proactive education and societal awareness. The family's grief transformed into a vehicle for reflection, memory, and ongoing vigilance. Emily Hayes often reflected privately on the subtle lessons hidden in the case. How ordinary lives intersect with extraordinary criminality, how decades of concealment can be dismantled by persistent observation and meticulous science, and how moral accountability, once dormant, will eventually assert itself. The shadows, while persistent, are not infinite, they can be illuminated by patient inquiry, ethical persistence, and technological ingenuity. Each finding, each observation, each small breakthrough in evidence reinforced the delicate balance between human perception, scientific method, and ethical responsibility. The red coat, the notebook, and the alley continued to serve as symbols. For Hayes, they represented the endurance of memory, the unrelenting pursuit of justice, and the fragile yet powerful interface between ordinary life and concealed threat. For the Moore family, they embodied both tragedy and vindication, grief and acknowledgement, loss and resilience. The community, while forever altered, gained perspective on vigilance, awareness, and the moral responsibility that accompanies knowledge of both ordinary behavior and extraordinary deviation. In the quiet of the evening, Hayes walked the Lower East Side streets, reflecting on the culmination of decades of effort. The city, with its relentless energy, thrummed around her, yet in these moments, the weight of the past pressed gently but persistently. Lillian Moore's story, once obscured by time, deception, and concealment, now existed as both fact and symbol, a testament to courage, a lesson in observation, and a chronicle of justice achieved despite time's relentless passage. The alley, the shadows, and the echoes of that night were forever transformed by truth, leaving a residue of reflection, vigilance, and moral reckoning that could not be erased. The city's hum never ceased, yet within the corridors of justice, in quiet offices, and along shadowed streets, the reverberations of the Moore case lingered like a low, persistent pulse. Emily Hayes returned repeatedly to the evidence vault, to the notebook, and to the fibers and DNA samples that had once seemed so small, almost insignificant. Each artifact, preserved for decades, now carried the full weight of revelation, an enduring testament to the intersection of time, science, and human observation. She examined the red coat again, its fabric faded but vivid in memory, recalling the precise angle of light that had caught Lillian's hair the night she vanished, the subtle rustle of footsteps, the uncanny attention she had paid to the minor anomalies around her. The coat, once merely evidence, now spoke, a silent witness to a life extinguished, yet a voice in a story that demanded to be heard. Mark Moore walked the streets of Manhattan more deliberately than before, attuned to small anomalies, subtle shifts in behavior, and fleeting shadows. The lessons of observation Lillian had inscribed in her notebook had become his own guide, a mechanism to understand both the ordinary and the extraordinary in urban life. He reflected on the cruel irony that such awareness, while insightful, had not been sufficient to save her. Yet the eventual triumph of justice provided a fragile solace, a knowledge that her life, though violently interrupted, had resonated through the decades to illuminate hidden truths, reshape community vigilance, and vindicate moral accountability. In the months following the trial, Emily Hayes began to compile the final reports and analyses, documenting not only the technical processes of investigation but the human, moral, and psychological dimensions of the case. She detailed how genealogical mapping had intersected with traditional detective work, how witness memory, preserved and revisited, had illuminated moments long forgotten, and how small details, fibers, footsteps, faint observations, had coalesced into a coherent, irrefutable narrative. Each report was a meditation on patience, ethical diligence, and the convergence of human and technological faculties in the pursuit of justice. Community reactions remained a mixture of reflection, grief, and awareness. Residents of the Lower East Side recalled the past with a renewed lens, noting how small behaviors, seemingly insignificant at the time, had contributed to unraveling decades of hidden malice. Conversations in cafes, schools, and community centers now included lessons from the case, the value of observation, the importance of documenting anomalies, and the moral responsibility to remain attentive to both environment and neighbor. Lillian Moore's story, tragic yet instructive, became a point of reference in ongoing discussions of urban life, vigilance, and the enduring impact of unresolved trauma. The suspect, incarcerated and isolated, faced the slow erosion of carefully maintained normalcy. Behavioral analysts observed subtle patterns in their adjustment, moments of reflection, partial acknowledgement, and psychological strain under the reality of irrevocable accountability. The combination of time, exposure, and legal closure imposed a psychological weight previously unknown. The ordinary facade, maintained for decades, had been stripped away, revealing the profound and inevitable consequence of human actions, even those long concealed from public or legal scrutiny. Emily Hayes continued to trace the finer details of the crime, revisiting both the physical environment and the psychological context. She analyzed movement patterns, environmental cues, and the minutiae of human interaction that had both concealed and revealed the suspect's presence. The notebook, fibers, and DNA traces were revisited with modern techniques, confirming the meticulous accuracy of previous findings while deepening the understanding of how ordinary urban landscapes can intersect with extraordinary crime. Hayes reflected on the delicate balance between observation and oversight, awareness and vulnerability, and the ways in which justice, delayed but persistent, could illuminate truth in the darkest of contexts. The Moore family, while experiencing relief from legal closure, engaged in ongoing acts of remembrance and advocacy. Small memorials, reflective walks along familiar streets, and discussions with local youth and community members transformed grief into active education. They emphasized vigilance, moral awareness, and the importance of preserving memory. Lillian's notebook, once a cryptic record of fleeting observations, became a powerful tool for illustrating the ways in which awareness and documentation can influence outcomes, even when the consequences of action, or inaction, remain devastating. The city itself seemed altered, imperceptibly but undeniably. Streets that had been traversed without thought were now viewed with a cautious eye, shadows once ignored were now registered subconsciously, and patterns of human behavior were more critically observed. Conversations, once casual, carried a subtle awareness of risk and observation. The Moore case had illuminated the intersection of ordinary life and concealed danger, providing lessons in vigilance, moral responsibility, and the persistent presence of history in daily experience. For Emily Hayes, the final months of documentation and analysis were both exhaustive and deeply satisfying. She wrote about the convergence of forensic science, genealogical technology, behavioral observation, and ethical diligence that had brought resolution to a case long thought unsolvable. Each page of her report emphasized the central principle: persistence, human observation, and moral commitment can pierce even the most enduring shadows. The interplay between human memory and technological advancement had been crucial, each complementing the other to reveal a truth that had eluded the city for nearly 30 years. The notebook itself became an object of profound reflection. Analysts, family members, and Hayes herself studied every line, annotation, and observation. They noted patterns of attention, the foresight embedded in seemingly trivial details, and the psychological sophistication of Lillian Moore's awareness. Each observation illuminated both her perceptiveness and the calculated actions of her eventual killer. The notebook was no longer merely a record of life. It had become a chronicle of moral and investigative significance, a bridge between past and present, victim and society, tragedy and resolution. Mark Moore continued to navigate the intersection of personal grief and public engagement. He spoke at community forums, educational settings, and public events about vigilance, observation, and the ethical responsibility to act on intuition and insight. The narrative of his sister's life, and the eventual triumph of justice, became a framework for discussion about human behavior, urban dynamics, and moral accountability. Through this engagement, the family transformed a deeply personal tragedy into a broader narrative of awareness, resilience, and enduring consequence. Emily Hayes reflected privately on the broader implications of the case. The convergence of time, technology, observation, and human diligence demonstrated that even decades-old crimes could be resolved with persistence and insight. She contemplated the intersection of ordinary life and extraordinary crime, considering how patterns of behavior, observation, and moral responsibility converge in complex, sometimes hidden, ways. The resolution of the Moore case was not simply a matter of legal justice, it was an affirmation that human diligence, technological innovation, and ethical persistence can illuminate truth, even after decades of concealment. The final months brought a sense of quiet reflection. Hayes walked the alleyways, the streets, and the neighborhoods where history had unfolded, noting subtle traces of human activity that carried echoes of the past. Each shadow, each angle of light, each minor disturbance in the environment reminded her of the interplay between perception and concealment, between ordinary life and extraordinary consequence. The city, relentless in motion, absorbed these traces, yet retained the memory of what had transpired, a silent acknowledgement of justice finally achieved. For the Moore family, the red coat and notebook continued